Here, please. Okay. So at the end of yesterday, I said we'd be watching some videos on breathing. And I have the first one here ready to roll. This first one I won't be able to, we won't be able to put up on the knowledge base because it's copyrighted by the Alexander teacher that made it. So unless we purchase a copy, I don't know anything. So it is what it is. Just see it and watch it. It's about 7 minutes long. And just a bit of background about the person who created it. The person is an Alexander teacher, but she also studied with a chap called Carl Stowe in New York, who got nicknamed Dr. Breath. And he developed his own system called breathing coordination, which you can look up online. And you know, all these different systems of breathing that are out there, they arise through particular circumstances. So in Carl Stowe's case, the circumstances were he was a choir teacher, and he developed quite unique skills working individually with each of his choir participants. Somehow, this was the 1950s, the army got to know of his skills. And at that time, they had a huge number of veterans in hospital with suffering from the problem of emphysema, really struggling to get breath in. And so they were high chest breathers. And he was called in with the assumption that he could do something to help. He walked in, he didn't know what to do. So he started to do what he did with most of his singers. And the principle was pretty simple. How do you stimulate an in-breath by promoting an out-breath? Yeah, because that's the body's physiological mechanism. The buildup of carbon dioxide triggers an in-breath. So that's what he did. And he got fantastic results. And then he created a method around it. And the method has all these particular ideas. So every method of breathing that you encounter comes from some sort of history and some sort of development, and it has its own little focus. And you then have to sort through all of that, like going through a forest, trying to make sense of some orientation and some sort of path between all this. This video is no different. Okay, so just giving you the heads up on that. I'll let it run for the first 7 minutes. If there is something that you are really wanting to stop the video on, let me know. I will stop it. Okay? I hope the sound is loud enough. It should be. Here we go. Oh, for those of you who weren't here yesterday afternoon, this lady was so enthusiastic, she went to Pixar to develop this video. So it's been made by good animators based on the information about breathing that she supplied. Critical point. Yeah, here we go.
Motion of the spine and the springy mobility of the ribs are crucial to efficient breathing. The spine serves as both a support structure and a mobile column. It makes subtle changes on each inhalation and exhalation. The ribs connect to and articulate around the spine. We have 24 ribs, 12 on each side, and because of their flexibility, multiple directions of movement are possible. You are now seeing the diaphragm, the primary muscle of respiration. The diaphragm separates the thorax from the abdominal cavity. It is a large muscle with a fibrous center called the central tendon. The two long muscle fibers inserting into the upper lumbar vertebrae are the crura, commonly referred to as pillars. Fibers spread from the dome-like shape of the central tendon and attach to the circumference of all the lower ribs. The excursion of the diaphragm is along the vertical dimension of the torso, descending on the inhalation and ascending high up on the exhalation. An optimally functioning diaphragm might rise as high as T5, the fifth thoracic vertebrae. Looking up from below, we see the floor of the diaphragm in motion. It is thin, supple, and irregularly shaped, with more muscle fiber in the back than at the front. There are three tubes connecting to the thoracic cavity and to the abdominal cavity: the descending aorta, the vena cava, and the esophagus. Our lungs are housed in our upper ribs. This is where the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide occurs. Most people don't realize the top of the lung extends up behind the collarbone, while the base of the lung touches the diaphragm. The lungs are not symmetrical. The right lung is larger than the left. Contrary to what is often thought, there is more lung tissue in the back than the front. The shoulder blades lie over the ribs and can be thought of as protective shields for the lungs. In order for the breath to move with ease, the scapula must be able to glide smoothly. Behind the sternum is the trachea, a pipe-shaped structure about 4 inches long. It divides into bronchi, which branch into bronchioles. These form the airway for the respiratory system. Working synergistically with the diaphragm is the psoas, a close neighbor to the crura, having a community of shared spinal attachments. The psoas is a deeply placed muscle concerned with movement and posture. The motion of the diaphragm creates a visceral massage and stimulates the internal organs. The heart nestles high between the lungs. The liver and stomach are below the diaphragm, as is the large intestine. Our kidneys in the back of the torso directly benefit from the motion of the diaphragm. Indirectly, the diaphragm influences the movement of all the abdominal organs. The intercostals lie between the ribs, moving in concert with the diaphragm. Their excursion moves the ribs outward and upward, downward and inward. The sternal-mastoid muscle originates at the collarbone and inserts into the head. The scalenes begin at the top ribs and insert along the neck. They are sometimes referred to as accessory breathing muscles. The serratus anterior are secondary muscles of respiration, which spread over the side of the ribs, helping to lift and open them. pelvis muscles at the top of the back and the base of the neck work with a minimum of movement, but in coordination with the whole. Our abdominal wall is layered. 4 sets of muscles surround the abdomen. The transverse muscle, seen here on the left, is the deepest. It interdigitates with the diaphragm. The rectus abdominis, pictured on the right, connects the pelvis to the ribs. The internal and external obliques travel diagonally from the ribs to the pelvis. All the abdominal muscles participate but never initiate respiratory movement. Breathing is an activity of the entire cylinder of the torso. Our abdominal muscles insert along the sides and the back of our body. Here you can see the quadratus lumborum and the erector spinae. They are important secondary muscles that participate in breathing. We return to the ongoing motion of the diaphragm. Breathing is mostly unconscious and automatic. It both influences our minds and bodies and simultaneously is influenced by them. Respiratory rates change according to the activities we are involved in. You might experience a slow breath in rest position or more vigorous rhythms when speaking or walking. Whatever we do, greater vitality depends on free and buoyant breath.
I know that lady, Lynn Martin. So there you are. Now, here's a scenario. Imagine some, 50-something dude in Israel in the 1950s with a couple of static anatomy texts trying to explain through static images and words what she describes with moving images. Tricky. So how does he go about it? Well, in some cases, very long-windedly. Yeah, when you read some of the, oh man, they just go on and on. But mostly how he teaches all this information is through awareness through movement. Because if you think about it, this is anatomical abstract information. This is information that's been constructed by our society because this is how we understand things, by pulling things apart and seeing how the parts fit together. Well, his claim to fame, according to himself, is that he's able to take ideas and put them into experiential understanding. That's his claim to fame. And remember the ATMs that we did the first week with the gluing of the lungs and all those, the image of the lung inflating and then pushing against the structures and then swapping that around and thinking how the structures needed to move to pull on the lungs? Well, that's the kind of image that's trying to get to the same process. The anatomy is far more complex than that. But he's reduced it down to a simple image that people can get and work with without it necessarily being anatomically accurate. Because trying to get it anatomically accurate, you'd have to do a course on the anatomy, and he doesn't. So what did you notice about that particular breathing pattern there? Oh, there's the orange box, the dangerous thing that doesn't roll. What did you notice? It was continuous? Who said that?
Is it on?
It should be.
What struck me is that while it was all very seamless and beautiful and it was very satisfying to have the muscles and all the rest of it, it didn't show us breathing when you're lying on your side, when you're standing on your head, when someone's sitting on your chest, when your abdomen's moving more.
Sitting on your chest, that's a good one. We've got to try that in ATM. That's cool. You don't give me ideas. Don't. Yeah, that's true. So that is the most obvious feature there. It's breathing in a particular scenario that's totally idealized. Yep. Sorry for that pointing, but it was very direct.
What I noticed was, on the in-breath, everything expands, and on the out-breath, it all contracts, which is how we had traditionally thought, happens in breathing. But, how we've been practicing different ways of breathing, like as in when you exhale, the belly expands. That would be interesting to see visually what happens versus, the belly contracting.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So most of the expansion that happens there is via the increase in the volume of the thorax. Would you agree? And there's hints of the bottom half of the cylinder expanding. So all these variations that we do in awareness through movement to do with breathing this way and then breathing that way and breathing that way, they're for a particular purpose. And that's to free up all the parts, all the components that could be participating in breathing, but might not be according to your history of experience. Yeah. Chuck.
Hi, sorry I missed most of that, but I was very interested at the end where she said, your abdominal muscles, can't remember exactly, can't initiate breathing. Which is interesting because in a way we've been doing these various activities that are about, pausing, completely stopping breath, and then say, for example, drawing your abdomen in, which feels like your abdominal muscles are doing something that then causes an effect that at least seems to sort of kickstart your lungs in a particular way. I understand what she means, but it was just an interesting way to hear that said.
It is interesting. You'd have to do a physiological study attaching electrodes to various muscles to find out which muscle fires off first to get to that detail. Think of the lesson you were doing yesterday, drawing in the abdomen to produce an exhale. Yeah. Now, is it the contraction of the abdomen that produces the exhale, or is it the co-contraction of the abdomen with the diaphragm, with other muscles? And in a funny kind of a sense, does it really matter? Or is it enough to just experiment with different ways of moving yourself and still getting the air that you need? Because that's basically what he's on about. Now, I'll just take this off and pop this up quickly. So this is a quote actually that starts off one of the lessons you did this week. All ways of breathing are good, provided they fit the needs of a person's body and that they are not compulsive habits. Always having to breathe a certain way is not breathing, it is compulsion. A healthy body breathes differently in each situation. So that's really what he's on about. As I said earlier, though, each one of us comes to these lessons with a history of experiences. And so we might be breathing in a particular way and believing that that is the way to breathe. And then we encounter these ideas and it goes, you confront it face on. And your response to it when confronted with these things, depends entirely on how strongly you identify with that way of breathing. Like if you've invested a lot of self-identity in that way of breathing, that's a big confrontation. If you've invested a lot of time and money in learning that way of breathing, that's also a big contrast, because time and money has value in our society. So when he's pushing this point, this is why all this variety of different lessons. Make sense? All right.
Soren, can I just ask a question?
Yep, Gloria.
The just left-right confusion. Which is our right and which is our left lung? Is it when we're looking at ourselves, or is it in our, which orientation are we?
Oh, that?
No, just in me, which would be my right.
This is your right.
So it would be with my right hand?
Yeah.
Is my right.
This is your left.
Okay, so it's orientated
Yeah,
to
yeah,
me.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
It's just different from my experience, that's all.
Ah.
Ah, right, okay.
Yeah.
Ah. It was like a mirror. Ah.
So here's a question that's not directly related to your video, but your experience of when watching the video. Did anybody catch themselves breathing in tune with the video? Yeah? Did any of you catch yourself actually starting to emulate the pattern that you were seeing? Yeah, interesting, huh? So what is that about us that quickly tunes us in to what we're seeing? Does that have something to do with individual rapport? Does that have something to say about how quickly we're influenced about something? It does.
Soren, I found it interesting and useful the way she drew your attention to so many muscles that are considered secondary in breathing.
Yes. Have you used some of those in these lessons?
Well, you know, it made me think of yesterday's exercise in so many different orientations.
Yeah.
Yes. And even, you know, bringing in the scaling.
This one? Yeah.
Scaling.
Yep. Now, as I just mentioned a moment ago, the science, well, the whole concept of science is our society's way of trying to understand things. That's not the same in every culture. Not every culture tries to understand the world and living things in them by pulling them apart. Some cultures actually try to understand things by trying to see the relationships as they exist, or through investigation of personal experience. So this is not the bee's knees of understanding everything. And when you know that, awareness through movement then has another level of understanding, that it's not necessarily about always pulling things apart, but actually detecting the relationships between experiences that you have. And that's not physical. That's something that's mental. Sorry, experienced. Yeah. So what else have I got here? I'll show you number one last. I don't know why I'm going to do that, but I will. Oh, if you want to have a bit of a chuckle, this is good. View the screen, enter full screen. I extracted this from the video that you just saw, and it's the movement of the spine and the ribs in fast forward. There we go. Which kind, and when you see this, you can actually quickly distinguish what she thinks the pelvis should be doing, the spine should be doing, the rib cage should be doing, the scapula should be doing, the neck. So do you think this person is resting? Or do you think they've just finished a marathon? Yeah? But there's something else that appears there. You know, when we make variations in awareness through movement and we ask you to sometimes increase the speed, sometimes the increase in speed makes distinctions appear that are not detectable at a slower speed. Whether that's because the events are closer together, or whether it's because the movements have gotten more distinct, don't know, but it has that same effect. Yeah. Yep, there's the box is coming.
Oh. I mean, what you've done there is simulate different activity.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that could be a baby breathing because it's rapid,
yep.
and you would get that kind of movement, or a dog panting, and somebody running after they finish running a race. They would be like that.
Yep.
I certainly would be.
Okay, so let's follow up on that comment, Philippa. So there is this image of a skeleton doing, well, it's more like a six-person skull, right? Moving rapidly. There's no hint about what is going on, but you supply the narrative to that. You construct the scenario via which you interpret those movements. So that's something that we all do again. And that's also something that's encouraged in awareness through movement. And it's the difference between giving an instruction and doing a guided tour. The last kind of tour guide you want is the guy that can't shut up and tries to point out every single detail and doesn't give you any space to explore anything in the whole place because they're just ushering you on. Whereas in awareness through movement, you leave these gaps. And in those gaps, you create a story. That's what human minds are good at. We're wonderful story creators. We want to imbue meaning in the smallest little gap. And that's what Philippa was just talking about. Yep.
So, Zoran, yesterday you were talking about athletes bending over to breathe in that particular position.
Oh, this one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, so first of all, why is that helpful to them? And secondly, would it be more helpful, but more strange to look at for the audience, if they were on their hands and knees?
Some do that too. Mm. Some lie flat on their back with their arms above their head. Yeah, because the chest is then pulled up.
Uh-huh.
You don't have to heave the chest, and here the chest is supported. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the weight of the chest is supported. You don't have to heave the chest muscularly. Mm.
So it's about muscular support. That kind of.
And hands and knees. Yeah. Once again, as soon as the arms are in that position, the strut of the the clavicle is supporting the manubrium, and so the chest is in suspension, if you like. Yeah. Whereas if you're just standing upright, there he is. Okay. No, he's got a useless chest. I won't bother. Jeez. Won't even bother with that chest. Okay. It's a good thing that wasn't a person, me saying that, huh? Oh, I got a useless chest. Can't use that one. But, you know, think of it. So this is a mechanical perspective. Excuse it. But, yeah. So if you have a supporting column, and then if you have something attached to the supporting column sticking out at that angle, that's usually called a cantilever. So it needs some sort of support. You could have another strut down here supporting it from below, and that's what you see in shelving. You know, when you have a shelf and then you have that little triangle and you've got a little cantilever coming up, that's one way of supporting it. Sometimes people support shelves in a slightly different way. They get a string or a chain and they support it from above. Raymond, which one's the compression one and which one's the tension one? Here it comes. Well thrown.
Yeah, gates are the same. You won't be able to look at a gate again. They use wood under compression to strut it up, and they use a steel gate will have a piece in tension.
Yeah. Because
the steel will fold if it's in compression.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the human body, in the rib cage, we don't have this. There's no bones from below that are doing support on the rib cage, right? Everything is in suspension. From the neck all the way through, all the little muscles that you talked about between the ribs, everything is in suspension. And it's hanging from the base of your skull and the top of your neck. That means gravity is wanting to pull you this way. And for you to breathe in, this has to go this way. A lot of work, right? A lot of work. Because there's a lot of weight in there. But as soon as you support that this way, it's different. It's different. Yeah, but then you've got the weight of the viscera forward. So this is like 45 degrees to gravity, and it felt different. Yeah. That series of lessons yesterday with all those orientations to gravity, and you're doing the I won't say controlled experiment, but you're repeating the same inquiry again and again. Draw in the abdomen, exhale. Draw in the abdomen, exhale. This position, that position, this position, that position, this position, and you experience different things, and it's the contrast that gives you the meaningful information that you need. It's always contrast. It's always the difference that gives you the information.
Just as an add-on to that position thing, when you're having a heart attack and you can't breathe, it's more comfortable for the person to be slightly leaning forward than it is to be lying on a hospital bed backwards. Because
you didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
When we learned about this at uni, we also talked about reversing the point of origin and insertion of the accessory muscles of breathing. So muscles like the scalenes and the sternocleidomastoid, which assist you to move your head or move your arms. If you fix those, then the muscles work in the opposite direction. So rather than using it to move my arm's now fixed, so it helps to move my chest. So it's assisting with respiration in that way.
Nice, thank you. Yep. Okay. Was there anything else before we go on? No? Okay. So this will be put up on the knowledge base because it's actually on YouTube, and it's my compilation. There's this great team of kinesiologists over in Canada, and they've put together these great animations and I've put them together here in this video. There's no commentary here. And for anybody first learning about structure, getting a schematic representation of structure is a good idea. You don't have to deal with a lot of detail. So these images are very schematic in their nature and very suggestive in the same way that the other video was suggestive, but even more so. in our knowledge base. Yeah. So, of course, what they're trying to depict here is that your thorax is a highly mobile structure that's capable of increasing its volume. It's functioning pretty uniformly left and right. And some of the lessons that Ruth has taught you over the weeks, you've felt that it can function quite differently in twisted positions when it's in very strange situations, yeah, which is a testament to the flexibility of the thoracic structure and how it can function in a multiplicity of different scenarios. This is a nice schematic of how a rib attaches to the spine and the vertebra, and how it's shaped and curved and then dipped. So a rib is a beautiful curved structure that's quite complex. It's not just a straight bone. And there you can see how the uplifting of a rib increases the diameter of the thorax, and it's different when the top ribs and the bottom ribs. Here are the top ribs. Not all first ribs move that much. What else is there? Here we go. So the tie at your chest. Nice image, huh? You can just call the breastbone a tie for all you conformists. And just showing you that it's also not a simple single bone. It's a structure that's composed of 3 different bones with different articulations, which suggests that there's actually movement possible between the segments of the sternum. That all-important first rib connection. And I think there was another lesson that Ruth was teaching where you put your fingers where the ribs attach to the sternum and you did that little push, push, push. And when you do that push, now that you've seen this structure, you realize that you're not just simply moving the sternum through space, that through with every push, you are actually affecting the vertebra at the back. So the effect is not where your fingers are, but somewhere else as well. Ah, there it is.
The origins of the transversus abdominis muscles, upward process of the sternus muscles, also increase.
There we go. Didn't want to watch all that. There we go. So the same group. So, you know, yesterday when I said, you know, a scan would be, where is your abdomen? Where does it start? Where does it stop? Is it just on your front? Is it at the sides? Is it at the back? when you watch a video like this, your idea of what an abdomen is changes a little bit. So what that Alexander teacher called a visceral massage can be quite vigorous depending on the rate of breathing and how large the in-breath is, and also how tight the abdominal muscles are. Most of the viscera contents are liquid. It's a liquid gaseous environment there. And from physics, we know that liquids are incompressible. Unlike a gas, where you can get a lot of gas in a small cylinder, liquids will not compress. And so when the diaphragm descends, it pushes on the liquid world of the viscera, and the viscera push against the wall of the abdomen. If that wall is stiff, what do you encounter? Resistance. If the wall is responsive and malleable, what do you encounter? No resistance. There we go. And one final video. This is an actual scan. It's not an animation. So there's the heart. The structure below it is the liver. You actually can't see the muscle of the diaphragm. You can see the outlines on the side. That's the rib cage. You can see how the ribs are heading upwards on every in-breath, and how the liver and viscera get pushed downwards. And you'll also note that the heart sac itself has an attachment somewhere, and it gets pulled as the diaphragm descends down. The heart itself gets pulled. And the heart also has an attachment to the back of the sternum. And so when the sternum goes forward and up, the heart sac once again gets pulled. The bigger the breath, the bigger the pull. So there's a lot going on inside when you do this kind of stuff. Any comments or questions? Nope. Fascinating. Yeah, you'll get to see it on your own several times.
I have a comment. Remembering one of the talks Susan gave us last week, with the six-pack.
The six-pack, yep.
And the people who train too much the abdominals, they can't breathe. They have very, very short breath. Mm-hmm. And it's because they have this muscle so tense and not very flexible working with the whole system.
And when I saw the first video and was adding things and adding the muscles, came to my mind this thing. No, we are a system with a lot of things, and how we train all these things affect also the results of the.
Exactly.
And the other things I want to share, I many years ago I did in Milan workshops. It names the dance of the breath.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Was gave by Turkish guy, or a Maroccan, and the movement was more or less something like that.
Uh-huh.
We were moving like this for many, and giving too much to the out of the breath. And we've been doing this for hours and hours and hours.
Yes.
And also sometimes adding sounds. And it was incredible how many hours we can do this, because it's like the breathing was something was feeding us, and I don't get tired. And most of the people were there from many different ages, wasn't young people all. They were doing this because the breathing was auto feeding us. Interesting.
Yeah, so we can become highly involved and our physiology can support our interest. Yes? Yeah, absolutely right. Or our culture can drive our physiology. Yeah. Because in that scenario, a particular way of working and exploring was created. And so with that supported your physiology. With the Ms. and Mr. Stomach Cruncher, their culture also supports their physiology. It drives them to have a particular physique and to shape their physique according to the culture and the values of the culture that they are in. And, you know, cultures are not uniform. Within every culture, there's subcultures and et cetera, et cetera. This is one of the aspects that Feldenkrais wants you to examine. So, how many of you read the beginning of the Awareness Through Movement book, the very first sentence? We act in accordance with our self-image. Why do I say that with a drone? Because it's been repeated many times. The concept of self-image, a little bit fuzzy, but we kind of know what he's talking about. This sense of myself that I have, this map of the body that's on my brain. We act in accordance with that. And then he goes on to say that changing that self-image is not just simply substituting one act for another. It's got something to do with changing the dynamics of how you act, which includes changing your attitude, mental states, ways of moving. And then he points to a particular way of doing that. And his suggestion is change your self-image through self-directed learning, which he calls self-education. So for Moshe Feldenkrais, self-education is the pathway to resculpting your self-image. That's the pathway. And then he gives a little bit of a, not warning, what can I say, look out for. Because we grow up in a culture and it's like a fish in water. Water? What's water? Culture? What's culture? What is it that I believe? And until you start reflecting, you're continuously influenced by the culture you're in. On Thursday, when we talk about language, you'll realize, according to a particular linguistic hypothesis, the Whorf-Sapir hypothesis, our language already shapes how we make distinctions in the world. How much more so all the learnings that we've acquired that shape how we think about the world, other human beings, activities, goods, everything. And here is Feldenkrais asking you, giving you a warning, saying, when you start to pick your own direction, who you want to be, what self-image you want to create, please reflect that you are being influenced in your choices by the culture that you're in. Can you even get to know how you've been influenced like that? Does that make sense? How can you even inquire, what are those things that have influenced my choices? I want to do this instead of that. Now, is that a burden? Obviously, for Feldenkrais it wasn't, because he was of that ilk. But for some people, that whole process of reflecting can be a bit tiresome. So they want some direction. Can you tell me, should I do this or should I do that? Or should I do this? And the last thing they want to hear is like, which would you prefer? Just tell me, would you? So you take them to the lolly shop and you get them to taste a couple of lollies. I.e., they have a few lessons around the topic that they're interested in, and out of those 3 or 4 lessons come 3 or 4 different experiences, and then they have a choice. Then they have a choice, not you telling them, go this way. You give them an offering. So let me give you an example. So there was this rabbi that was being interviewed on television. And this particular interviewer asked the rabbi, there's these Christian fundamentalists. What do you think about them? And he replies, well, you know, they're on about the New Testament, and I don't have a New Testament. I just have the Old Testament. And he said, the way they think is interesting. They think that God said this, and then they just simply accept it. And that's it. He said, now, amongst my colleagues, my other rabbi, we have a different approach. We look at something, and we don't think we understand it until we have at least 5 different ways of understanding the same thing. That's the culture that Feldenkrais came from. To understand something is to have a multiplicity of different views on the same topic. Can you see that's what you've been doing in awareness through movement? In a funny kind of a sense, the academic discipline of anthropology tries to do the same thing. Not to make judgments about which culture is better, whether, you know, that tribe in the Amazon is better than the subcultural tribe in the upper north of New York. There is not that attempt to make comparisons, good, better, best, worst. The attempt is to understand that culture from its viewpoint and then look at another culture from its viewpoint and another culture from its viewpoint, study them really carefully through being in there, immersed in the culture, observing, becoming almost a cultural participant, and then going, oh, that's that cultural world. Oh, that's that cultural world. That's that cultural world. That whole discipline of anthropology is about that. When I was going through my training, because my partner Joanne was going through her anthropological training, we had lots of discussions like this. And I would say to her, you know, I'm kind of doing a personal anthropology here. I'm reflecting on how I've come to do what I'm doing, what other cultures have to offer in terms of what other movement designs and patterns, and she's reflecting on the larger perspective. So that's an interesting viewpoint from my perspective. From yours, I'm not sure. What do you think? Yeah, Emma.
Emma. Does that mean if you live in a more multicultural society, you might be more aware of yourself because you're exposed to more views and ways of doing things?
That's a possibility. Remember how I said earlier, I didn't say it this way, but information rides on difference. This, that, oh, there's a difference, information. So you could say that in a multicultural society, if you are of the ilk of actually trying out without judgment, not trying to compare in order to judge better or worse, but oh, this is how this group of people live. This is how this group of people live. Several of you put your hands up when I asked you how quickly were you influenced by that video. Yeah, remember? Your breathing was influenced by that video. How quickly do you think you'll be influenced when you go into another culture and try to live like they live? The influences will be subtle enough that some of them you won't even know until you reflect upon them. And there's a certain kind of training that a cultural anthropologist has to go through. And that training is, what values, what beliefs am I bringing in that are shading or filtering my perception of what's going on? Because until those come into question, that filter will be there. In a funny kind of a way, an anthropologist finds out more about themselves in the process of interacting with a culture as much as they find out about the culture. Yeah? Because they'll butt up against certain things and they'll go, whoa. And as soon as they get the whoa, it's like, oh, that's interesting. Why a whoa? What is it? What am I being pricked on? Why is it that every time we do a breathing lesson to do with expanding the abdomen, I hate it. I just hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. Or something to do with expanding the chest. Oh man, I get so angry. Why are you making me expand my chest? I hate you. Yeah? So then at that moment, you need to ask yourself the question, what's going on here? And that becomes not an anthropological inquiry in terms of, but it becomes a somatic inquiry where you use your... Time's up. That's it. Level. I set my timer to stop myself up for an hour because I can go blah, 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 blah. Yeah? So, see, I know that about myself. All right. So that's the place you're put in. In this method, we're primarily doing a very sophisticated kind of somatic inquiry, developing a capacity to sense with great discrimination how we move, and also be aware of our thoughts that lie behind the movement, our emotions that lie behind the movement, unpeeling away those. Why? So that you can have... You're going to wake up for me? So that you can have freedom. One more story. Sorry, phone. One more story. Yeah, Emma, I gotcha. Okay, just yeah. So here's the story. This story was related by Dennis Leary. I'll give you a shortened version of it. Feldenkrais once got the opportunity during the 1970s to meet up with quite a famous Tibetan monk over in teaching over at California in Esalen. And Feldenkrais being Feldenkrais, he got to interact with this monk. So there he is sitting on the couch. He's introduced to the Lama. And he says to the Lama, so what's the problem? Just boom. And the Lama says, oh, I got a problem here with my foot. See, I got a problem with my foot. And he says, oh, what have these distinguished doctors have to say about your problem? oh, they say, oh, I'm a little bit overweight, and he says, no, that's not your problem. He said, yeah, but the doctor said, that I'm just carrying too much. He said, no, that's not your problem. He says, me, I'm 30 kilos heavier than you. I don't have a problem with my foot. And then he leans forward and he says, you know what your problem is? You sit cross-legged all day too goddamn much. And it's like the whole audience is shocked, right? The whole audience is shocked by this, but can you see his directness? So sometimes the problems that we have are directly related to the practices that we've acquired or wish to continue, whether that be six-pack or becoming rubber man or whatever, yeah? Or becoming, oh, I just want to meet everybody face on and I'm tall, so I just do this all the time because this way I feel like I'm equal with you. Who knows what it is? Yeah. Yeah. So sometimes this is a very direct method, very piercing, yeah? Uncomfortable, but it doesn't have to be like that. Once you get to know your group and who you're teaching and the person you know, it doesn't have to be like that. Yeah. Then if that wasn't enough of a faux pas, because you can imagine 65 people in the room, oh, lama, 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 oh, lama, lama, yeah? Then he says, and these 65 people in the room, are you training them to be free or are you training them to be Tibetans? And the Dalai Lama, and it wasn't the Dalai Lama, can you imagine the Dalai Lama? But anyway, and the Lama says to him, I'm sorry, I don't understand. He says, well, you're here, you're from Tibet. These practices that you're teaching these people, are these practices for their freedom or are you teaching them to be like you, like Tibetans? And instead of the Dalai Lama, and instead of the Lama getting upset by this, he actually understood the question. Because the whole purpose of practice, contemplative practice, is to liberate yourself, not to become a being from another culture. You could say that that's exactly what Feldenkrais wants through these lessons. For us to have the freedom to be able to form ourselves as we wish to be. Does that make sense? And that harkens back right to the first day that we met. And I said, I showed you those videos and I asked you, how do you know they're doing Feldenkrais practice? Can you tell by just the movements? And then I said, it's not about the movements. It's not about the movements. It's not even about the experiences that come out of the movements, as much and as nice as those experiences are. They're lovely. But after a while, those experiences drop off. And then your practice is challenged because you're not getting the hit every time. Then your practice is challenged. Then if you have a group of people around you going, ha, 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 and you have a belief in the practice, so you continue, right? Yeah. So, you see, now I told you I can go on too long, but that was an important point. So, Emma, what was it that you wanted to comment on or ask?
I was a bit eager. It's just because I forgot this question from last week and I meant to ask Susan. We were going through the ATM lessons from the book, and one of them is called Perfecting the Self-Image. Yep. And we had a discussion in class about that. There was a better title. I think we were making up titles for that lesson. Uh-huh. So I meant to ask Susan at the time, then why has he called that particular lesson Perfecting the Self-Image? That's the rolling of the ball one? Yeah, with the balls rolling over the body? I can't remember which one it was, but yeah, it was the imaginary one, yeah. So here's so shall I practice a Jewish practice? Answer a question with a question. I know we should explore this for ourselves, but
Oh, that one. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, it wasn't the one we did on Friday. It was a different day. Yeah.
Every lesson is about perfecting the self-image.
That's what I mean. So, like, why that one?
How many of you at the beginning would even contemplate the possibility of your big toe touching your forehead? No, you're silent. You would. Yes, you would. Right. Yeah. Now, let's do statistical analysis here, right? So you see, self-image contains within it that which I can do and that which I can't. And through a process of designed movements, he liberates parts of the body, or he potentiates parts of the body to enable you to get closer to something that you believe you can't do, and that is perfecting the self-image. Why is it perfecting the self-image? Sorry, a bit of mathematics. Yeah. So you know, in mathematics you have set theory and Venn diagrams. Yeah. So let's say that this circle represents all the possible bodily configurations your structure can do. Yeah, everything. Then a subset of that is your self-image. That's a subset. Now, the word perfecting is a bit of a loaded word, would you say? So let's explain it like this. Perfecting that self-image would be about expanding that image more and more and more until it approximates all the possible things that you can do. What are some limiting factors? Some limiting factors are that compared to an idealized skeleton, your structure has its own peculiarities. So let's just say that circle isn't an idealized skeleton, it's you. All right, so that's not a limiting structure. Then what else is a limiting structure? Well, the things you've come to believe in your culture. It is not proper. We've had this discussion. It's not proper to sit like this. And so you sit like this. And if you sit like this long enough, the bone itself starts to change and the length of tissues start to change. It's not just a neuromuscular event anymore. So can you see, teasing that out requires a longitudinal practice to regain a little bit of what you've lost. So beliefs, sets of emotions, actual structure, they can all bring you back, but Feldenkrais would claim, what's the one single thing that is immediately changeable? The relationship between the brain and the nervous system. That changes in milliseconds. Not necessarily sustained, yeah, but it changes in milliseconds. And that's what prompted him to say at the beginning of the Amherst training, what we're on about here is restoring to ourselves the capacity that brains have, which is neuroplastic. Brains are neuroplastic. Nervous systems are neuroplastic. And the relationship between nervous system and muscular is so intimate that as the nervous system changes, then the response of the muscle changes. Now that's the physiological underpinnings of his notion of perfecting the self-image there. Yeah. So you go from, I can't, my image doesn't include that, to suddenly for some people, oh my God, I had no idea I could do that. Which then might change the way they live their lives if they take it there. But it might also change their lives in terms of something changes in the coordination of their back and their front, that helps them anyway. But in the larger picture, they've missed the boat. They've seen it as an exercise and not seen it as a practice of liberation. Does it make sense? Yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask one more?
Yeah, Emma, sure. Any of you can respond. I'm getting sick of my own voice.
I don't, like, I guess from a philosophical, I mean, I get all this, like, it's about freedom, you know, the story, that's a great story, like, you don't want to be X. But at the same time, and I'm guessing I'm just asking you because maybe Feldenkrais has said something on this. How can every single person in this world have so much freedom? Because, you know, some of those religious practices or cultural practices actually are a unifying force within society.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he was also came from a very religious background, so he still had like rituals that unified him to something as well. I don't know, like. So,
No, that's a very good question, and that's a question for another talk at another time. His answer, Feldenkrais's answer to that would be you would need to have an evolved society of evolved individuals capable of forming and deforming groupings, and that's called anarchism. Yeah. Other people think that, but that's a different discussion. But in a funny kind of way, in this room, you have the same scenario. You're all in the same room. You're all doing your own individual things. There's like a river of invitations of things to explore, but each of you explore it in your own way. So that's like a mini answer, but it's not really an answer. It's just a little pointing. Okay. So unless there are any more comments or questions, we should go into a break. And yeah, you have something, Mark? Okay.
Yes, that which you've articulated, can you hear?
Yeah.
That which you've articulated this morning, of what this is, that's the essence of what attracted me to this now. To all that, let me see. Well, to the exploration that everything is connected to everything. And if we want to know that, let's explore.
Well, that would be an interesting discussion to have, whether everything is connected to everything, but okay, yeah.
Well, if you think of it physically, our body is a complete system, and everything is connected with everything and interdependent to support that system. So expand that to all of, to this room, to the teachers, the students, the interaction.
Yeah.
Take that into society, to the world, take it through the animal kingdom as well, all of life.
Yes. So what are the patterns that connect?
Yes. So
would be the question. What are the patterns that connect? And some patterns are more or less stable, and other patterns are not so stable. Those patterns that we believe to be totally stable, are they really stable, or are we just believing that they're stable? So this is the kind of inquiry that we're doing here, but in a very, very, what you would call, functional domain. There's no dispute that Feldenkrais method operates within a very functional domain, the functional domain of being able to act in the world using through your body, right? That's how it works.
Yeah, but it seems that that you can take that inquiry in any direction.
Yes, you can.
Well beyond the physical.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just my observation here.
Yeah. So that's good to know that that's what attracted you. So there's lots of things attract people to practicing a practice, and certain things attract people to practicing this method, and that yours was that, and that's a good thing.
Well, this is exploring why we don't see what is there. or all of what is there, I think. But, I'll stop there.
No, that's good. No, there's how can I say this? In public, and in a kind of way, I find this more or less a safe public. It's not easy to avow what I've just said. Yeah, I don't say this necessarily to the groups I teach. I say it to you because I feel I can say it to you. However, when you read a quote like that, which Feldenkrais wrote in the 1940s, it's undisputed what he thinks. It writes, to alter the course of an existence, the whole attitude and manner of action must be changed. Yeah? He didn't dare to publish that book. It was published after his death, because that kind of comment is not empirically provable by his peers. And he wanted to be approved by his peers, the scientific community. And that's not a scientifically, empirically provable statement. So he didn't publish that book. I would put that forward as a possible motivation for that. Okay? So being able to talk about these things is good. Being able to talk about doing lessons to improve a particular function for that person at that time, just in order to improve the function, that's also good. It's all within the sphere of the method. Where the problem lies is when you lose sight of the whole perspective and you just go this or that. Yeah? So as long as you've got the full sweep, you go, oh yeah, now I'm operating here, now I'm operating there. You are oriented in your practice, not disoriented or mono-oriented. Yep. Full stop. Okay, please have a break.